welcome to the second episode of our podcast.
This episode, we have Kevin Suarez on, an Oklahoma educator. Dalnaz, what did you enjoy about this episode?
I really enjoyed how he talked about how social media affected how information spreads, because that is definitely relevant to high school students, which is who he teaches and who we are as well. What about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. He was pretty young, so I enjoyed when he talked about, the difference between his education and like how he teaches now. So like important things that he wish he would have learned in high school, he learned in college, and so he's teaching that to high schoolers now. I thought that was really interesting and kind of intriguing about what he carried through.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in, and we hope you guys enjoy this episode. Bye.
To meet you
Hello,
though.
Mrs. Suarez.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How
Hey.
are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
The first question that I have is if you could talk just a little bit about your like educational background.
Yeah, sure. So graduated from University of Oklahoma last December, so recent college grad, and then went right into teaching, but I started off as a substitute teacher. And so I started off at Independence Charter Middle School, and then I was at Harding Charter Prep for a little while too. I was back and forth. I didn't really know if I wanted to stick with teaching. So I was applying to a couple of other companies, but uh, I enjoyed the work at Harding and at Independence. I chose Harding just because I wasn't ready for middle schoolers, honestly.
Mhm.
They need a little more attention, but um, the Harding staff really welcomed me in, and I guess I felt a little more secure with them. And I already knew the system a little more because I was looking at other schools to apply for teacher positions. But yeah, that's why I started at Harding. As for college education, so I graduated to a bachelor's in English writing, and then I had a minor in computer science. And so now I'm currently teaching at Harding. So that's where I'm at right now.
Oh, so it doesn't sound like you've been teaching very long. You're a recent graduate.
Mhm.
So what is it that you currently teach?
Oh, computer science at Harding Charter Prep. So computer applications is one class, and then my other class is computer science essentials.
Awesome. Well,
Mhm.
my next question, and this is relating to an assignment you did earlier in the year, but first, do you want to talk about that for a little bit, like what that assignment was? Because you had an assignment about
Mhm.
digital literacy. So before we get
Yes.
to the other ones, if you want to just talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so I figured I would start this was computer applications, and I also talked a little bit about it in computer science. So I wanted to start off with a base for the rest of the class. And so we started with a couple lessons on digital literacy, and then we went off into just like basic functions and parts of a computer. But I did digital literacy. So we started off with the lecture. So I started talking about it. I was like, does anyone know what digital literacy is? And really no one knew. Like no one in the room had ever heard like that term or that
Mhm.
phrase. And so I went into a little bit about what it was. And then another assignment was they had to find an article and explain either examples that uh, was used for digital literacy, like that article used digital literacy in, and they had to write a short report about it as well. So that was the actual assignment we did, but
Right,
it was like separated. So I started off with the lecture and then the report.
right. So, and then just to kind of follow up, since it was about kind of like news slash digital literacy, how has misinformation or maybe the lack of digital literacy affected you like personally, maybe if it has, or professionally as well, such as how you mentioned no one knew what it was.
Mhm. Yeah, so I actually had never heard of digital literacy until college. It really never came up in high school. And I think that's just because you don't really get introduced to those ideas in high school because it's really just it's set, like the classes are set where you just don't touch on that stuff. And like in my computer class, that wasn't really something we talked about. Um, and like I had heard this term in a it was a journalism course I took in high school, or not in high school, in college. And
Mhm.
so the professor, same way, she like straight up just asked, does anyone know what digital literacy is? And we were all just like, no, we had never heard. She was like, well, let's just think about, and this is how I taught it at Harding. I was like, well, let's just think about the word itself. digital literacy. Like, what do you think literacy is? And so we were just thinking, well, literacy, is like reading and writing, right? And she was saying, yes, so reading and writing. So why is it called digital literacy? And so we were just thinking, well, does that have to do with like, technology or like browsing the internet? And that's where I got introduced with it, was through journalism. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like in the journalism field, that's really what you're trying to um like learn about. So at OU, I also was a reporter for the OU Daily, which is a newspaper there. And so that kind of helped me actually get like firsthand experience. At first, they were telling me you're writing too opinionated. They're saying you need to write more objectively. Let's not say what you think. Let's just say how it actually is. It was cool because I was learning through the course and also working at the newspaper at the same time. So I was like learning what I learned in class and then also applying it as a reporter, which was it was fun in one way because I could go to all these events on campus and then interview all these people that were giving discussion panels or were giving lectures. And so it was kind of cool just doing that role. But I think that's where it really started. And now I'm trying to apply that mindset to everything I do now, because once you get out of college, at least now it's like you're really on your own. Like you have to take in what you can on your own, and then there's no one, like there's no teachers keeping you on top of everything. And so you really got to be mindful of what you're taking in information wise and figure out what you want to believe. You can't just believe the first thing you hear, because that's what a lot of us do, especially now with like students in high school. They'll just take the first thing, like first Instagram page that pops up, the most popular tweet, or like a rumor that a friend told them. It's like, no, you can't go on through life like that, or else you'll get misinformed, and then that could lead to a lot of other stuff. So,
Definitely, yeah.
mhm,
Yeah, and so you kind of said that you learned closer to college in college.
mhm.
Um, do you think that because you learned in college rather than high school that you are now like feel the need, or what makes you feel the need to now teach it in the high school level? Do you think that's important?
Yes, absolutely. Just because from firsthand experience, it's like I didn't have that education up until college, and I'm like, well, why is this not being introduced earlier on? And it might just be something that's just innocently overlooked. Teachers just don't think about that because they're more focused on the curriculum, whatever they're doing, all this other stuff. But I think when I was coming up with like my lesson plans with computer application, I was like, well, let's think about what skills you need to utilize technology wisely. Because kids nowadays, the technology is everywhere. Like when I was growing up, like I was telling my students, it makes me sound a little older, but like technology was being like I lived through when technology was actually being introduced. So we started off with like the iPod touches, and then they started introducing more computers, and then like the tablets. Like in high school, we had iPads, and it started off like my second year, it's like sophomore, junior year, something. I can't remember exactly, but that transition, it was a big change for us, and there was a lot of hiccups. Like let's say the Wi-Fi was out, teachers would just not do anything. It's like, no, like come on, you got to do better than that. But now like I see the kids like uh at Independence, like they've all got their laptops, they've all got the technology set up. And so I was like, I mean, yeah, sure, we can rely on it more, but if we're not using it correctly, then you're not really doing any difference. But I think that's why I decided to go that route, because I was thinking, well, let's think about, if we're going to be using these computers in my class, let's be smart about it. And for one, let's not use it to, like play games or download some files you might not trust.
Mhm.
Let's also use it to help in our assignments, help you gain critical thinking skills. That way you can use this in other classes as well.
Awesome. So this is, you kind of just mentioned it at the end real quick, but with these skills that the students gain from this assignment and just from learning about digital literacy, what are some examples of things they can like apply it to, and how important are those?
Mhm. I think the biggest example when I was teaching it, I was like, well, think about if you're trying to write like a research paper, or trying to find information for like a project you're doing. You don't want to give the wrong information to get a better grade. And so you also have to think like digital literacy isn't just knowing how to use the computer. It's like trying to find what you need for the right cause. Um, and so I started off there. I think it was just like let's think about some examples of digital literacy. So I would give like, is knowing how to, send a text digital literacy? Kind of, not really though. That's not that was the biggest thing. Trying to setting like finding examples of what's actual digital literacy and what's not that might be perceived as that. Because some kids were I remember we had a quiz. Some kids thought just like knowing how to use a computer, like turning it on and stuff, is digital literacy. Like no, it takes a little more thinking than that. Just get, like helping them apply their thinking with other areas. Because I'm like, you're not just gonna use this in my class. If you go on to higher level in college, you'll need these skills regardless. And I feel like everyone should have that, just in life in general. So you don't want to be too gullible and just learn what's being told to you. Like learn on your own. Don't just be guided. And I know in high school it's a little different because you're being led. Sorry, my voice is cracking, but you need to be led. You need to be like you're being led in high school. But after that, who's gonna be in charge? It's just yourself. So start early, so that way you could gain that momentum.
Yeah, and so in teaching, is do you see that misinformation and like news bias kind of do you see that becoming more of an issue since you're I mean with students it's more apparent, but do you see news literacy and digital literacy becoming a bigger issue?
I think yeah, especially with like the whole election tension, whole political tension. I think that's the biggest one where kids have been most affected by, especially like the past few years. It's been a lot more it's been like more intense on the political level. And so I don't think they realize like a lot of it, like some politicians, like they are really just trying to scare you to get their vote, or they're using these different tactics to get the other opponent to look bad. And it's like, well, if you're only relying on that, then you're not really being a good like you're not in a good political standing. Like these kids aren't like not all of them are eligible to vote, but I'm like if you're just basing off what the media is telling you, it's not going to work that way. And like yeah, at some points it is credible. There are some sources that, are right. But with how social media has evolved, it's like you can say one thing and people will misinterpret it and put it on the other end a completely different way. And that's really the scary part. I was telling you, if you got to be really mindful what you're posting online too, because people can look you up, find something from a while ago you might not even remember you did, and it might not look bad on your part, but it can catch up to you in the long run because everything stays on the web. So like I was showing them like on my stuff, like you can try to find me. Thankfully I don't have a record, but like I'm fine. But I've also made good choices. I'm trying not to, do something stupid.
Right, right. So you also kind of touched on this, but if you want to give more detail, maybe about your opinion on this, but why, or I guess, what do you think is making disinformation so popular in a way, or much more easier to access in a way?
I mean, personally, I feel like it's just personal gain. People just want more power, want more influence. And sadly, there are a lot of people who might not have that education that just don't realize what's going on. And it's also just lacking of influence on their part. They don't have that like those teachers or those people telling them like, hey, you shouldn't just believe this. And I think it's just easier because a lot of people can believe it, especially through that little check mark on Twitter, or so and so said this. But if you didn't actually read what so and so really said, then that's not really it. So that's what I personally think. I just think it's just people just wanting to influence in different ways to whatever they need. Um, and it's just nowadays it's just easier, you know. The media, you could do it on Twitter, do it on social media. It's so much faster, easier, and it spreads like really quickly. So it's a more dangerous game now. And it does worry me because with these kids, if they're not really paying attention, especially with like the lack of, I don't want to say lack of education, but the lack of support the education system had, especially with COVID and everything, these kids aren't really fully prepared. And I want them to be more prepared than, how they would have been if all this mess wouldn't have happened. So I just want to do it for them. And introduce them to ideas they might not hear. That way, at least early on, if they're like, if they're in my shoes when I was in college, like, hey, what's digital literacy? They're like, oh well, Mr. Suarez talked about it. At least I've heard of it at some point in my life.
Yeah. Uh, um, has has there been an experience or something that has happened that was something you wanted to make sure your students were informed of, or make sure to guarantee that they would know and have heard of news literacy and digital literacy?
Like what I did, like in the classroom. Was that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I think it was just more with the assignment. I was showing them examples of like these are actual credible sources. Like you can identify credible sources by one who wrote it, one what the date like is, or how like the web page that it's posted on. Obviously, you don't want like some shady link or if you can't find an author, at least try to find the like the site, the like the actual source, like the website or whoever wrote it. So I was trying to help them identify, you know, what could be questionable too, because it's like if you're just showing, if you're just giving, like let's say you're just giving statements, like this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. Think about, well, if this happened, why did this happen? Like start thinking like question it so you can say, okay, well, let me look back into it so I can actually understand what's going on. Because if you're just reading, oh, this is how it happened, then that's it. Like you can't really do anything with that. You should be asking yourself while you're reading this, okay, well, what led up to these events? What led up to this person doing this and just stuff like that. So I think it was just identifying actual credible sources and how to use them correctly.
So, from what you've seen so far through these lessons, how much of an understanding do you think maybe your students and high school students in general have regarding news literacy? I know you mentioned that most of them didn't know what that even meant.
Mhm.
So if you want to if you have any other details you would like to add on that.
Yeah, I this was really early on. This was like one of the first lessons I did, and I feel like I didn't bring it back up since then just because we've been doing other like regular classwork. But I think like next semester, next year, I'll try to use it a little more consistently. Not even just talking about it, but just using it in my class. I know it's like it's only my first year, and I tell myself it won't be perfect. So I'm trying to find every like at least find important lessons I can talk to them about. Um, but I think first is just introducing it. That's the first step, really. You want them to just get a basic understanding, and then later on I can adjust and see what else I could do with it. Because I threw that up just because I felt it was necessary for my classroom. Um, and then we talked about like other things as well. But just digital literacy was the first thing I remember. I was thinking I was reading through the notes I've had in college, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I could do this. And the students understood it really well. Like all their assignments were really nice. I was genuinely surprised at how well they could understand it. But later on, I could figure out how to do it, improve it a little better. So that way, it's not just at the beginning of the year and then we just forget about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's something that can continue and um be addressed in multiple in anything really. But kind of on top of that, do you think that like news literacy and misinformation awareness is something that should be addressed in specifically a digital class, or do you think it kind of can be introduced in other classes um, who use the public information?
Yeah, I think anyone like it could be applied to any course. And I remember that's what my journalism teacher was telling us. Like you might be using these skills in other classes, you just don't realize it. But I guess it just depends on really what you're trying to do in the classroom. That was really more I used that just to gain more of understanding of how good their writing was and also understanding of like their articles. So comprehension and reading and then just helping them find article. I also I allowed them. I gave an example of like an actual credible source. I said, okay, now it's your turn to try to find one like this one, and they successfully completed it. So I was really surprised. I don't think it's like too much of a complicated topic to learn. I think the hardest part is using it.
And I do have one more question. You mentioned this a couple times, but how do you think or just social media in general, like whatever you want to say about it. How do you think it changed how information spreads, what the danger is to it, and all of those things?
Yeah, so when I was giving my lecture, I was talking them. I brought up TikTok because I was like, think about TikTok. The algorithm is gonna feed you the videos that you're like feed you videos that you're most interacting with, you're liking more, you're sharing. And I told them this happens. This doesn't just happen on TikTok. This happens everywhere. If you're using Twitter, Facebook, it's gonna feed you what you want to see because this is what you're choosing to look at. And
Mhm.
so I told them if you want to avoid this, try to look things up on your own and not just based on what you're supposed to be given because that's just how the program works. Like maybe it's maybe that's just how it's been written. But I told them like with social media it's really dangerous because like you can fall into one area of one social media and you'll stay on that side because that's what it's giving you. And I remember in college we saw a chart like it was like the Hillary and Trump election chart, and it was saying like all these people who were posting like all the Hillary tweets, and then this side was posting like all the Trump tweets, and you could like see like both sides like just completely separated, and their users were all people who were just following like those people. So it was like all the people who were voting for Trump were just on this end, all the people in Hillary were on this end. And it's just that's just how it is. Like if you're like, I'm not saying that should be the influence of who you're electing for, but your mindset will be adapted that way. It's not, or it won't be adapted. It just stay that constant mindset. But if you want to adapt it a little more, I told them like it's not a bad thing to stick with what you believe in, but it's easier to understand people if you understand where they're coming from. And like, both sides aren't equally bad or equally good. It's just trying to understand how one people thinks and the other person thinks. That's just how it is. No one's gonna be the same.
Right. Very interesting.
Mm,
Yeah, I agree. I think like a really interesting thing is like the the lack of diversity within when you're consuming news. It's almost as important as like not having a reliable source. Like,
mm,
diversity in news is something that is often overlooked, but just as important as finding a reliable source.
mm. Yeah. And like I told my kids, if you're only sticking to one side of the spectrum, you're not gonna get any farther than that. So challenge yourself to understand other ideas, even if you don't believe in them. That way you get that diversity. And I mean that's what college was all about. I met a ton of different people who I might have not agreed with, but that doesn't mean I hated them. Didn't mean I saw them any different. That's just like you gotta accept that's the way the world is. And if you want to be comfortable and stick to whatever you want to do, that's fine. But at the end of the day, you're not learning. You're just staying to what you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining
Yeah.
us. We
No,
really
of
enjoyed
course. Thank you
talking
for
with
having
you.
me.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. We enjoyed discussing all of this with you.
No, thank you. Anything else y'all need from me?
No, unless you have anything to add or if you have any questions about this or anything.
Uh, I don't think I need to add anything. I guess I'll just add like how far are you two planning on taking this?
Well, to where it goes, I mean, I don't know. It's pretty
Mm.
recent, I feel like. This is only our second interview, and the way it works is
Okay.
go it's basically our podcast, but
Mm.
yeah, we're gonna go to our first like in-person presentation.
Mm.
Is it gonna be like in 2 weeks, next week? When is it?
Next week. I think it's Monday,
Not
28th.
this current Monday, but like
Yeah.
yeah, the Monday.
Mm. That's exciting. It's just like I've never like personally I've just never known like students doing something like this. So I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah,
No,
I mean,
yeah,
it
that's
was
awesome.
Lauren had the foundation, and I was just
Mm.
like, please let me in. I want to do this. But yeah,
Thank y'all both for having me.
awesome.
And
Thank you.
it was nice meeting you, Lauren.
It was nice meeting you. Thank you for joining
Yeah.
us.